Welcome to the Mindful Healers podcast with Dr. Jessie Mahoney.
And Dr. Ni-Cheng Liang.
We are physicians and leaders who are also trained in coaching, yoga, mindfulness, and integrative medicine.
We are also mothers, spouses, sisters, daughters, aunts, and friends.
In this podcast, we share candid, heart-centered, loving, science-based, thoughtful, and often fun conversations about the challenges life throws at us.
With our collective experience of over 30 years in physician and personal wellness, we reflect and offer pearls of wisdom for navigating life's challenges with more ease.
From parenting, marriages, money scarcity, cancer survivorship, uncertainty, challenges in practicing medicine, we cover it all.
We invite you to refresh your perspective and empower yourself with mindset, mindfulness, and other well-being tools that actually work. A quick reminder that nothing in our podcast is medical advice.
Before we dive into our conversation, we will take a moment to arrive, knowing that this topic is one that is twangy and brings up a lot of issues for many of us. So taking a moment to bring your mind, body, and spirit all into the same place and take a big deep breath and settle in for hopefully what will be a fun and interesting conversation. Welcome to today's episode of the Mindful Healers podcast. Today's episode, we are going to discuss You Don't Know What You Don't Know with a special guest, Dr. Rachel Bickling. And this episode is inspired by the work that Rachel and I have done, talking about her experience with an 8-year plus malpractice litigation journey and many of the things that she wished she had known along the way. And our intention today in our conversation is to go beyond the usual advice, which is so many doctors get sued, it's normal, it's part of the process of being a doctor, and actually talk about some key pieces of advice to help you navigate this if it happens to you, and to also provide reassurance that you will have some tools to navigate it if and when something like this comes up in your life. And the takeaways, a few of them, there are going to be many more, are that the legal system is not medicine. To not show up in the legal system like a doctor. It's no place for the shame, blame, guilt, victimhood, martyrdom, personalization, right, wrong, all or none, catastrophizing, or even helping. All things we talk about all the time on this podcast. And also that very little is in your control, except how you choose to respond and whether and how you get help and support along the way. So as we begin, my thought is that lawsuits pull the rug out from under most of us, and they bring up trauma anywhere and everywhere. And one of my missions in sharing this podcast is that medical malpractice cases lead to terrible things for many people. Many people leave medicine. Many people commit suicide as they go on. And one of my purposes in life is to prevent that. And at a minimum, they bring up so many of the unhelpful thought patterns that we talk about here, and really specific unhelpful thoughts. Many people consider quitting. Many people wonder and think maybe they did something wrong. They second guess and judge themselves. And the catastrophizing around a ruined career or a lack of income or losing your license and all kinds of things that we make it mean because we don't understand it and we don't know what's happening. And so I'm hoping our conversation today will bring a little bit of ease to some of those and give you a few tools, what you wish you will know if this ever happens to you, which I hope it doesn't. But if it does, hopefully today's conversation will bring you a little bit more ease as you navigate the bumps. And so I'd like to introduce you to Dr. Rachel Bickling, and I'm going to have her introduce herself and we will dive into our conversation. So, Rachel, thank you so much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm excited.
Tell us a little bit who you are, what kind of physician you are, and anything else you want to share.
So, my name is Rachel, and I am a family practice family physician who is a little bit of an unusual beast insofar as I practice full spectrum obstetrical care, full spectrum family medicine, taking care of people from conception to death. And am fellowship trained actually in surgical obstetrics and gynecology. And did that really with the purpose of serving in a rural and underserved area, which I've been doing now for 19 years in rural Washington. I am a mother of one teenager who we adopted the same month that this lawsuit dropped, and a wife of 25 years and a cellist and, well-rounded person who never really thought that something as great as an 8-year legal saga would be something that would affect me. Or that I would experience, despite everything that statistics were, told to me. I never thought that with the relationship that I have with my patients that something like that would ever occur. So that's me.
And will you tell us a little bit about your purpose in coming on the podcast and sharing your story and your experience with this lawsuit? What did it mean to you, and where are you today?
I decided to begin working with you, Jessie, to try and make something good out of what was really clearly the most traumatic experience that I've ever had in my professional career. I have experience in other areas with bad things happening in my world that something good always comes of it, but this has just been it has been such a long process, and I really want to move on and heal from the trauma that I experienced, and so would really like to share with others who are either at the beginning of their legal journey and or in the midst of it or at the end of it, really struggling to find where to go. I'd like to kind of share my experience and the things that I learned and that I wish I had known at the onset. Yeah.
And I want to reflect on just the fact that I think that any physician involved in a lawsuit, and perhaps even potentially nurses and other people who are involved in a case that goes to a lawsuit, it's traumatic. And you mentioned to me how many of the hundreds of years of medical training left medicine as a result of the case you were involved in. And I think just reflecting on the fact that hopefully some good can come of each of these, in the sense that even if we have more knowledge of what might happen and why it's different than our practice of medicine, that it would cause less trauma if it happens to any of us, and perhaps that we can be better support people to someone else who might be going through it. I think sometimes we know someone's going through something like this and we don't know how to be supportive. And so hopefully our conversation will help a little bit with that. I know that was not actually our initial conversation, but it strikes me as you were talking that many of us don't even want to listen to a podcast like this because it makes us nervous. But we are all service and kind humans who do want to help others and feel safe in the practice of medicine. And so perhaps we can change culture a little bit as we talk about this. So our discussion is going to be what Rachel wished she had known and what she thinks would be helpful for us to know, with the caveat that this is not all of it. As we had this conversation, we thought this could be a series of podcasts, and there's so much to talk about. So this is our first delve into a few of the things that will be helpful to you, and perhaps what we decided at the outset were the most important. So we have 8 things that we think would be worth sharing. And the first one is a recommendation to ask questions and get help. Do you want to share your thoughts on that, what that means?
None of us, other than mention that, you will or you're highly likely to get sued, none of us really understand what the legal realm behaves like. We don't understand how information is pertinent. We don't understand what is important, what isn't important, and we don't understand how to even really make it through it. And nor do we know necessarily the consequences of the things that we share, the things that we say. One of the things that I didn't realize at first, but fortunately, because of an outcome of the case, I realized that I needed a lot more legal support and knowledge than what I was given. And the only way for me to find that was to request, and really more importantly, insist on having legal representation of my own. I was not named as a defendant, but I was named as a witness, and initially thought that the legal team that I was working with was actually working on my behalf. Through various experiences, really began to realize that though we were working together, the lawyer and the legal team were not actually my lawyers. If my best interest was in conflict with the best interest of the hospital, they were not going to share with me that there was that conflict between the hospital that I work for and my own interest. And so having my own representation empowered me to be able to approach decisions and events in the case where I could understand the consequences of not only the decisions that they were making, but also understand how those decisions would affect me potentially in the future, which was helpful. We live in a world, in the medical world, where it's our job to give informed consent to our patients. And most of us take that very seriously, right? We need to talk about the risks, the benefits, and the alternatives. And although your lawyer is obligated to do the same, you need to make sure that the person you're working with is actually your lawyer. Because if they're not your lawyer, they don't have that same obligation to share with you the risks, the benefits, and what your alternatives are. They have to share that with their client, not with you as someone who is working on that team.
And this reminds me of our deposition podcast that I did with my husband last fall, where in even third-party depositions where you're not named, you're actually a witness. So similar, that most medical systems do not provide a lawyer to physicians, and that we just assume other people are watching out for interests. That's the doctor mindset. And we assume that, our job there is to be helpful and that it's all going to work. It's funny because we assume there that we're going to be taken care of. We're there to serve, which is our usual mindset. And so realizing that you need to know who's watching out for your interests, as you mentioned. And my husband said, he was shocked that physicians aren't automatically given their own lawyer and that anyone in the legal world would recommend that. So absolutely in a malpractice case, and I would say anytime you get a deposition, we should be asking, but no one taught us that. And so that is key, to be asking how it works. Because we, again, as you've mentioned to me several times, you don't know what you don't know. And so being clear that this is not the time to be quiet in clarifying.
You only understand what is going on when you ask questions. And it's really, it's like our patients coming to us in environments that they don't know and making decisions about things that they don't know anything about. It's really intimidating to speak up and say and ask things, but the only way that you find out that information is by taking the risk to ask those questions. And at the end of the day, boy, I'm certainly glad that I spoke up and was able to get my own legal representation. It's not that I needed to be combative or negative with the hospital's legal team. It's just that I needed to have my own legal representation so that if and when there were points at which our interests were at odds, we could navigate that and negotiate that in ways that were amenable to both parties.
Reminds me of the phrase that we actually talk about a lot here, which is me as well. We tend to, serve and go outward, but remembering to take care of yourself as well and to take care of your own interests as well. I often say, put your own oxygen mask on first. That's very hard for many doctors, but to put it on as well works. And this is the same thing. Like you can be there and be a witness, but also take care of yourself as well.
It's not being selfish. I mean, it's allowing you to navigate a very complex system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then our number 2 point is actually to not think like a doctor. And I think that just weaves directly right into that. So do you want to reflect on why not thinking like a doctor is very helpful in the midst of
Yeah. Well,
litigation?
so I think that pretty much anybody who's gone through medical training understands what a pimping experience is, right? Where you are asked a question and we all take pride in sharing absolutely everything that we know about that particular topic, to tell our attending and show our attending exactly how brilliant we are. That in the legal realm is actually counterproductive, right? The lawyers for the plaintiffs and oftentimes your own lawyers really have no medical knowledge about the lawsuit in general. And our job is not to train them or give them that information about what medically was going on. Our job is to answer purely and simply the question that is asked, no more, no less. And that is probably one of the hardest things to do because our training praises over information, right? It praises us for being the one who knows the most. And it's something that you have to look at in a very different way, which is counterintuitive for most medical providers.
Don't be a helper.
No, don't be a helper. Don't assume that because particular questions are being asked, there's any sort of commentary on the care that you're giving, or that you gave or that you did not give, right? We all tend to infer meaning to what questions are being asked, and we tend to catastrophize as a result of that. And when you do that, you end up oftentimes giving more information than really what you want to be giving. It opens up just an emotional sinkhole for self-critique, blame for whatever the outcome is that has led to this lawsuit. Yeah.
And I think the other one that we had comes up a lot for people in lawsuits, and it's sort of self-explanatory, but not catastrophizing. I think so often we go all the way to the end that it means that we'll lose our license. It means that this, it means that that. And my thought is just hands wide open. Well, really hand to heart and hands wide open all at the same time. But our doctor training is to catastrophize. Our doctor training is to go into all those negative thought patterns and figure out what we did wrong and to make it about us. And as you mentioned there, when they ask the questions, it's not about you. It's not even about, as you've mentioned to me, what's right.
Mhm.
And that
It's not about what is necessarily medically right. It certainly is not necessarily about, at least in my opinion, it's not necessarily even about what is morally right.
Yeah.
There are so many other things that are at play in a lawsuit and in a legal environment that personalizing it in that manner just opens up Pandora's box to the point that you can then end up becoming the victim, becoming or I hate that word,
Yeah,
but
we'll get to that
yeah.
topic of conversation. Well,
But
I think it's
yeah,
really just don't personalize it. It's
yeah,
not about what's right. And that leads into our next topic, which is the legal system is not medicine. But before we go on, I did want to reflect that this conversation is really, as you said, it's in your experience. We're just having a conversation about your experience, and nothing that we're sharing is medical advice, nothing is legal advice. As you've heard our legal podcast before, like listen to your lawyer, get a lawyer and listen to a lawyer. But I think hearing people's personal experience, which is rare, and we're also trying very explicitly to not, this isn't about this case specifically. It's about
no.
the experience of a human being going through a lawsuit who happens to be in medicine, and what that's like, navigating that with a human brain that is trained to think like a doctor. And that's what we're really having this conversation about. So the caveat for everything else we say is this is in our opinion, which is not right or wrong. It's just experiential, which I think, honestly, as I think about this, is one of the most raw, human, vulnerable experiences, and the willingness to share that. If we could have more sharing about this experience, I think it would save a lot of grief for so many people. So
A
again,
lot of
just,
lives. I mean,
yeah,
when you think about it, Jessie,
yeah, yeah,
isolation that you go through, I think we'll get into this later, but the
yeah,
isolation that you go through really sets up for
yeah,
a lot of loss at the end of the day. And the more we are willing to talk as a medical community and support each other through this, I can only foresee that loss improves, right? That we don't lose as many people, whether that's to career change or retirement or suicide.
yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about this number 3, the legal system is not medicine. I found this really, I think I knew it, but when we were talking about it, I was like, wow, that's an epiphany,
Yeah.
thinking about it that way.
Yeah. We approach a medical problem with a differential diagnosis, and we take findings, we take vitals, we take history, both social and family, as well as genetic, and compile that with physical findings as well as laboratory findings, and come up with what is the most likely diagnosis, right? We are all trained to look at this in a very objective way, and to take subjective matter, really apply that subjective data to objective data. And the legal system is not like that at all. There, first of all, is not really any sort of informed consent, as I kind of alluded to before. If you don't have your own lawyer, the legal team that you're working with does not have to tell you all of the legal consequences of the things that you share and the things that you say. And that's certainly something that is foreign to us as medical professions, or medical professionals. But the other thing to recognize is that science, although they pretend that science is a part of the decision making and an arrival at the truth, it really isn't about scientific data. It is about which of the teams the legal teams tells the most poignant, the most touching story, and then applies what appears to be scientific support for that story in and of itself, whether or not it's actually whether or not you can consistently connect the dots from the beginning of the story to the end of the story is irrelevant. It's just who tells the most poignant story. The other thing is that we consider most of the information that we get with labs and data and such as pertinent information in our decision making as to what the diagnosis is. And that's not the case in the legal realm. Things like family history, social history, things that we would all consider to be very pertinent in coming up with an idea of what is going on may actually not even be permissible into the court of law because it may be considered to be prejudicial in the eyes of the legal system, right? And so even though we look at that as in a very objective manner, and try not to apply judgment to things that may, in a normal realm, cause a lot of judgment to be made, because it can cause prejudice to a jury, oftentimes you will find that that information, even if it is valid, will be excluded from the case, which at the end of the day can be very confusing. It can be very angering as a scientist to see this information being excluded, but it's not the same system. Our legal environment is not a scientific environment. It is an environment constructed on laws that were not built around science. They were built around justice, and justice does take into account prejudice and things that can prejudice people's opinions.
And so that blew my mind to think that, certain things didn't apply in the legal system,
Yeah.
and yet it makes sense. And so,
And it's enraging when you think about it, and it is absolutely enraging.
to me, it's a spot for accept and be angry, or accept and be frustrated, or accept and be disappointed. Again, resisting the reality of it is expensive, I'm certain.
Oh yeah.
And we get to decide how we want to show up for it. And I think we can't decide that if we don't understand it. And so I think that's one of our most important points, is that the legal system is not medicine and doesn't think like medicine. Tell us, the next one is listen to your gut. It's funny because it almost seems, as we're at this point in the podcast, a little bit the opposite, right? Like our gut would say, that's not right, shouldn't be right, let me argue. And yet I know that's not what you mean by it, but what do you mean sort of by learning to listen to your gut in the process?
We are all, doctors, nurse practitioners, physicians, nurses, we are very, very smart people. And many of us are quite intuitive into the circumstances that we walk into. Whether that's walking into a room where you suspect that there may be domestic violence, or whether that is walking into a deposition and listening to how questions are being asked and realizing that there's more to it than what is really being asked. And recognizing that intuition and that gut instinct is something that will suit you well if you learn to listen to it, and learn to try and clarify, gosh, I'm feeling like something is happening here. I feel like you're inferring this. What does that mean, right? Someone asks you to sign a consent for settlement, as an example. You are not sure what the consequences are of signing for a settlement. Make sure you clarify exactly what that means. Make sure that you have someone, again, who is your lawyer, who is going to tell you what the consequences are of allowing a legal team to settle for you without your input. And yeah, if it doesn't, if things are not ringing true, if they're not seeming to be clear, then listen to that and ask questions of your team. And if you're not getting clear answers, then persist until you have that gut feeling resolved.
And then our favorite topic, victimhood, is next. And
Ugh.
the flip side of it, which is intentionally acting from a place of strength and opting out of victimhood. And before you dive into what this means for you, I often say we might be a victim. And I think anyone who goes through a lawsuit is a victim in some senses. And we've talked a lot about this idea of second victimhood and even just our tendency in medicine to show up as a victim. We are a victim in some ways, but choosing to opt out of that role because being a victim is disempowering, and figuring out how you can show up in a different space is really where your power and control lies. So tell us a little bit about your experience with that.
Well, so I alluded earlier, I really dislike the idea and the concept of being a victim. And I think that logically and technically, I suppose you could classify me as a victim, but that really, I'm a control freak. And by allowing someone to say that I'm a victim of this legal system, I am giving up my power and my control of the entire circumstance. It's not healthy to do that. It's not healthy to give up control of traumatic circumstances. It's important to recognize that there is trauma there, but it's also important to recognize that there still are things that you have control over, even in a situation that is like a runaway freight train, right? Whether that is control of how you sit at the defendant's table in the court and how you pay attention to the plaintiff's witnesses, or whether that's how you and what you choose to participate in as far as coming up with a defense. Take control of what you have the ability to take control over, because at the end of the day, there is so much in the legal realm that is not in our control. There, if your trial goes to jury, you are in your fate, the decision, well, what you may perceive as being your fate, and the decision is placed in the hands of 12 lay people who don't have any medical knowledge. And that can be very disempowering. It can be very frightening, but you do have the choice to look at that in a different way, right? And I guess what I would say is that I chose to look at this as though I was still in control of the circumstance by participating as much as possible with any of the decisions that the defense attorneys were allowed to have me be a part of, and give feedback sometimes even when feedback wasn't being asked for, right? Observing things that were not necessarily medically accurate or even true, and pointing that out to the defense attorney so that in cross they could go up and ask clarifying questions, right? It's just these little bits and places in the midst of this 8-year saga allow you to continue to have that control and not be victimized by the process as a whole.
And I think letting go of what's not in your control is what I'm
Right.
hearing. Focusing on what is, and we talk about that a lot on this podcast, right? If we focus on what's out of our control, we feel like a victim, we feel anxious. And I think it was a conversation that you and I had about how when doctors are out of control, that's when we feel like a victim. Like it's almost an equal moment. And so by focusing on what's in your control is how you can step out of that victimhood and or just opt out of it. To me, like we sometimes feel like, well, then we have to find the place of strength, or then we have to do something, but we can just decide to let that go.
I'm not going to be a victim,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that's the thing that I think that you introduced me to the concept of the second victim, of adverse outcomes, and certainly the idea of second victimhood with medical legal. And I guess I'm really fortunate that I didn't know that there is this entire it's not even a philosophy, this entire occurrence of second victims as a result of bad outcomes. And yeah, I have never seen myself as a victim of this, but I do see that I am in control of trying to figure out how to make something good of a really bad experience. And by doing that, I think I am inherently avoiding becoming a second victim of this lawsuit. Yeah.
And so we're talking about what's in your control. And our last 2 points of what you wish you had known, and are 2 places where I see you took control. The first one was getting help and support for your mental health and practicing medicine while going through a lawsuit. And the second is mindfulness, which of course align perfectly with everything we talk about here. But do you want to talk first about choosing to get help and support for your mental health and how you sort of navigated that and why it's important?
The initial portion of the lawsuit, I kind of was quite oblivious to what was going on. Really did not participate a lot in the decision making or the construction of the case at all. And fortunately, there was a mistrial. And it was at that point where there was kind of I had this epiphany that I was a lot more involved than in this case than what was actually being presented to me. And I can very honestly say, kind of lost it as a result of that. You know, I was told at the very beginning, the very first meeting that I had with the legal team, you know, you cannot talk with anybody about this. You can't give any details to any of your colleagues. You can't talk with any of the co-defendants about the details of the case. And any conversations that you have with people are not protected conversations and can end up coming back. And one of the first questions that you will be asked in the middle of a deposition is, have you talked with anybody about this case? And the reason why they ask that is because they want to be able to bring those conversations to light, with the hope that they may discover pertinent information. And so the isolation from my colleagues was just a profound isolation that I don't think I've ever experienced, and I certainly hope to never experience again. As such, really, in order to continue to function, I needed to get help. I needed to talk with a psychologist. I actually took time and focused on my mental health because I wasn't going to make it otherwise. And I realized that it was affecting how I was working in the other realm. My world is not just an inpatient world of obstetrics, but it's also an outpatient world. And I realized that, I was in a space where I was second guessing everything. That isn't a healthy space to be in. And it certainly is not a healthy space for you to be making medical decisions for other patients. And so I needed to take time off and get support through that. And what is fortunate is that part of the mental health team that my hospital has is someone who has practiced mindfulness and meditation for their entire career, and they became an amazing mentor for me to learn from and to learn how to change my perspective of all of these different things that were being thrown at me.
I think we've talked about practice mindfulness and more mindfulness and more mindfulness.
And more mindfulness.
And when difficult things are happening, whether it's a lawsuit or not, right? Mindfulness and self-compassion, which we actually haven't talked about today, but they're life rafts, like during these difficult situations. And they're often a gift of a difficult situation, and that then you have that tool moving forward. You mentioned really the thought that I want to bring up is that the system doesn't and won't take care of you unless you insist. And so we do need to insist on getting help. And in my formal wellness role, I know that many institutions have special mental health support for people going through lawsuits where the support is confidential and privileged. And so you need to ask about that. You need to find out about it. Oftentimes your malpractice carrier has that. And so ask about it. I think we think that if we acknowledge that we're having a challenge, then that means that we did something wrong, or it means we're not strong, and I would say, of course you are overwhelmed. Of course you're stressed. Of course you need support. It makes no sense that you wouldn't. The other thing that you had mentioned to me as something that you wished other people knew is the thought of also having some kind of a mentor as you're going through it clinically, because of course, when you are going through something difficult, medicine is hard to practice when you're not. And I've often talked about how, I do a lot of marriage coaching and parent coaching. Like if you're going through a divorce or you're going through a separation, it's very hard to be a good doctor because it's distracting. And if you're going through a lawsuit, it's the same thing. And so just acknowledging that we are humans, and when humans are managing challenging things, they need support, and we need mental health support. But I think we also need support from people around us. And that doesn't have to be talking about the case. It's just sort of someone to run by. I think sometimes we start to question our clinical capacities, not because we have any reason to, but like, can I just run this by you? And have that resource can, I think, be really helpful. And that is something that I have not seen in any of the wellness programs that I've been a part of that I think would be a critical new intervention that hopefully can be.
I mean, that's inherently what I did. I literally felt like the rug got pulled out from under me. And even though my clinical knowledge had not changed, the moment that I went through this, I began to second guess everything that I was doing. And, I looked nationwide to see what kind of programs were out there to help me reconstruct my self-confidence. And that doesn't exist. We have a lot of support for providers who suffer addiction. We have a lot of support for providers who've been out of practice for years or decades and helping them get back into practice. But there's not a lot that I am aware of that is out there that helps someone who is going through this existential crisis of confidence to help them regain it, particularly when there's really not necessarily a reason for you to have a loss in confidence other than the fact that you're going through this critical event. I wish I had had a mentor that had gone through this, that I could speak with confidentially, that would have been there to help me walk through the process. I am fortunate that I practice with an amazing group of people. And when I went to them and said, I may call you in the middle of the night for things that are just really stupid, but be aware that I'm doing so because I am not confident and I'm rebuilding my self-confidence. And I was very fortunate that I had a group of partners that were very willing to help support me through that process.
And as I think lots of doctors listen to this podcast. So that is something that we can all do for other people, is be that non-judgmental, supportive voice. And could we build a culture where that is the expectation? I think when someone's going through a lawsuit, it's almost, and I say this with total love, but like they have the plague and I just don't want to think about it. And
No,
like, and so being that resource and support actually makes it a little more stressful. But what if we could, acknowledge that this is a normal part of medicine and we can be here for each other
right.
along the way. What a beautiful
I
opportunity.
mean, it is the norm, right? Statistically speaking, it is the norm that we will go through some form of legal experience in our careers. The longer you practice, the older you are, the greater the chance you are to have of having that experience. And instead of the normal reaction, which is to really feel like you have the plague, I love that, because that's exactly what I felt like. I would mention to some of my best friends, some of my dearest friends who are in medicine, well, I'm going through this and I'm feeling this way. And it would just be like crickets in the room.
Yeah.
And then the topic would switch, and that it's just so, it's understandable, because we all kind of want to be an ostrich and ignore this nasty thing that's in the room. But at the same time, that is what then leads to the continued perpetuation of isolation of people. And that's how we lose them to retirement, career change, and suicide, is by extending that isolation.
And so I am beyond grateful, and I'm hoping everyone listening is grateful that you are choosing to step out of the isolation and share the knowledge and what you learned. And I would offer that I think the way that we've shared it today is a way that other people could share it, right? There's no specific information about the case. There's no specific, it's just about you and your experience and what you learned and how our mindset gets in the way and what things can help and what things don't help.
Yeah.
So as we get to the end, I did want to hear from you, because I think this is a really important piece for people. You have managed to stay practicing medicine despite a really challenging last 8 years. And so many people who were also maybe peripherally involved or whatever, a lot of people leave when this happens, and a lot of people left. And so what do you think it is that helped you stay? Because of course our intention is that people who want to continue to practice medicine be able to do that.
Yeah. Well, I would say first and foremost, I'm probably one of the most stubborn people that you will have met. I promised myself at the beginning that if I made a change in career, it was not going to be because of this lawsuit. That to me would have been the ultimate admission of guilt and the ultimate admission of wrongdoing. And at the end of the day, I know that I provided great medical care, regardless of what decisions were or were not made in the court of law. And so I did not want to have someone else or something else in charge of me continuing to practice. The other thing is that I am the sole provider for my family, and really, truly, there was no other option to continue to support. We all have student loan debts, and the reality of that is the reality. And there was nothing that I could see at the time that would allow me to continue to support the family that I have. And then, the mental health portion of this, and really embracing the recognition that I was in crisis and that I needed help and I needed to change perspective on how I looked at things. I grew up with a father who was a physician who was victimized by the change of medicine and insurances and all of the lack of control that he experienced throughout his career. And I really promised myself at the beginning of practicing that I would never become that way. And in order to not become a victim of circumstances, I really used mindfulness as a method to change my perspective on what the whole case meant and what it meant for me to stay in medicine, right? I chose to focus on the happy interactions and the congratulations and the encouragement that I was getting from patients. I actually began to share with patients what I was going through with respect to the lawsuit and not be ashamed of that. And found that my patients became an incredible support network for me going through this process. So
That's amazing.
yeah.
And I
It
think
was a risk. I mean, it was very clearly a risk. It's, I live in a small community and I will tell you that it hit the press like no tomorrow. And I felt like I could either ignore the fact that it was out there, or I could grab the bull by the horns and just state, yeah, I have gone through this and it really sucks. And no, I can't tell you anything about the case, but wow, this has really affected me. And the love and the outpouring that I experienced from my patients was probably, now that I think about it, other than my stubbornness, probably one of the most powerful things that kept me in medicine. The recognition that they loved me and that if I wasn't there helping them, that they would miss me.
Yeah.
That was very
I think
important.
that's the most powerful case for vulnerable is valuable that I've ever heard. And again, I often refer to it as elegant vulnerability. So it's not, and that's the sort of I'm going through this and I'm human. And of course, it's impacted me.
Yeah.
And it's actually in many ways a gift to patients to be able to honor what you offer them. And I think we so often don't share anything. And, you and I were trained in a time where that's, you're not supposed to do that.
You have to be very,
But
I'm the doctor,
I think
right?
that as medicine changes, we have to connect as humans. And so that it's really the human to human connection that's allowed you to stay in medicine.
Well, it put me in the place of being a human, right? When you have somebody who's going through a divorce and you share with them, well, holy crap, I hate the legal system too, and here's why, right? It brings you to an entirely different realm in their eyes. And how I look at people who are going through legal situations that I've gone through, it brings an entirely new level to my compassion that I didn't have before. Again, it's changing, gradually finding these areas where you can change a really crappy experience into something that is meaningful and good at the end of the day.
And that's the perfect spot to conclude our conversation, that it can be something meaningful and good, and that mindfulness, and as you mentioned, compassion is really critical. And that's, of course, what we talk about here. But so many other pearls that you shared today are so valuable for those of us who work with people who have gone through lawsuits, who may go through one ourselves someday. Hopefully not, I'm going to knock on wood. But even for any kind of deposition and any life challenge, I think these are really relevant topics. So I want to thank you so much for being willing to share. And we may have a part 2 because we had so many other things to talk about. But we'll let
more by the moment.
Yeah, we'll let this all sit with all of you. And I did want to let you know that Rachel is available to have people reach out to her. The easiest way to find her is on Facebook, which is her name, Rachel Bickling, which the last name is Bickling. And you could just message her there if you have would like support or questions, or as she mentioned early on, part of her mission now is to help make this an easier, less traumatic experience for others going through it. So if connecting with her would be helpful to you, she is there and available. And so we both want to thank you for listening, and do stay on. At the end of the episode, I will offer a grounding mindful moment to help you reintegrate back into your day after this conversation.
Thank you. It's been fun.
Thanks so much for joining us.
We encourage you to dive into the show notes for each episode for more learnings and resources.
We also invite you to take a listen to the many other Mindful Healers podcast episodes. And please share the podcast far and wide with colleagues, friends, and family.
If our message and approach resonate with you, we would love to work with you.
When you listen to a podcast, you consume information, but when you work with us, you can actually practice and change.
We offer coaching and mindfulness experiences, talks, workshops, retreats, and more. Connect with us at themindfulhealerspodcast.com.
The content of this podcast is not medical or life advice. We invite you to participate in the mindful moments we offer at the end of most of our podcasts, but please only do so safely. Welcome to today's mindful moment offering. Inviting you to close your eyes or lower your gaze a few inches in front of you if it's safe for you to do so. Noticing the points of contact between you and your surrounding environment, like the support of the ground beneath your feet, or the support of a chair, or whatever it is that you're sitting on. Taking a moment to ground yourself, noticing the support that's available to you unconditionally. As you're ready, inviting you to hold out your hands so that your palms are facing upwards. This gesture of receiving or allowing just as it is, not grasping or pushing away, but simply open. And envisioning money to be in the palm of your hands. Getting curious about this imagery. What does money look like to you? Does money equate to wealth? What does money mean to you? Noticing what thoughts, emotions, and body sensations are arising for you as I invite you into this imagery practice with curiosity and openness and non-judgment. Noticing if there are difficult emotions or difficult storylines that are captured in thoughts. Acknowledging that money can mean a lot of different things for many people. There can be a lot of judgments associated with money, how much one has, how little one has, if one wants money, if one doesn't want money. So many potential judgments. What if you simply allow whatever associations there are with money to simply arise without judgment and just get curious about what you notice and what's there. And as you're ready, bringing a sense of gratitude for the money that you do have in this moment, right here and now. In this moment, perhaps inviting in a letting go of wanting more or worried about having less, but simply bringing a sense of gratitude to what you have now. Beyond just money, but your own wealth, whatever that means. Perhaps wealth in mind, body, and spirit. And as you're ready, bringing your hands back into your lap, taking a moment to notice what's here for you now. As we close this practice of curiosity with non-judgment regarding money. And as you're ready, blinking open eyes, letting the light back in. Thank you so much for practicing with me today.